Do you remember trying to learn to ride a bike? I don't even know if you know how to ride a bike, but I remember when I tried to learn to ride a bike, it was just the scariest and the most exciting thing on the planet. But the truth of the matter is that I stumbled and I tumbled and I fell so many times I lost count of how many times I fell. And the thing is, we lived on the street that had two inclines that met in the middle. So it was kind of like a V. And we lived at the top of one side of the V. And I used to stand next to my bike, next to my house, and just take a deep breath, get on it, and hope and pray that I would make it to the bottom of the incline without killing myself. I actually broke my arm in one of these attempts, and it was just the most incredible feeling when I finally got it. When I was finally able to balance myself on that bike and to move forward without falling and knowing for sure that I could make it to whatever my destination might have been. Now, here's the thing. There's an analogy between riding a bike and trying to balance your life and your business. There's this myth out there that in order for us to be successful, we have to be able to balance our work and our life, that we need to be able to find this perfect equilibrium, right, between what we do for a living and who we do life with. And while that is a beautiful notion and the idea of having a perfectly balanced life is appealing to most of us, there's a myth behind it. And the myth is that just like riding a bike, you can never be fully balanced. You're always looking to be balancing your life. I mean, think about it. Think about when you're riding this bike and you're trying to not fall over, especially when your training wheels come off, right? If you don't keep moving, if you don't keep pedaling, what happens? You fall over. Now, we are going to take this analogy a little bit further, but be thinking about, have you fallen victim to the myth or the idea that you need to have a perfect balance between your work life and your personal life, for lack of a better word? What have you done to try to keep that balance? And what has it cost you to think that if you're not perfectly balanced, then you can't be successful? We're going to be talking about all these things in this episode of Sincerely Speaking. So in the subtitle for this episode, I called it The Bicycle and the Compass. And we already talked a little bit about the bicycle. And what I wanted to keep in mind is that idea of trying to ride a bicycle. Now, if there's no balance in riding a bicycle, you're going to fall over. But the truth of the matter is that you can only keep balanced in your bicycle riding attempt if you are somehow utilizing your pedals, right? Like there are people that are really, really good at riding bikes. I'm not one of them. And they can keep playing with the pedals kind of like back and forth in this weird jiggly motion to keep themselves from falling over when they're not really moving anywhere. But they can only do that for so long. Sooner or later, they're going to have to either pedal forward or put a foot down, right? Now think about when you put your foot down to not fall over on a bike. What happens? Yes, you're not falling over, but you're putting all your weight on one side, and the rest of it is kind of hanging up in the air, right? Like picture that in your mind. So I believe that something very similar happens in our lives. We tend to think that we can achieve this level of balance, and we are told so often to work towards having a work-life balance, to try to not move too far in one direction or the other, to not ignore one over the other, and to find that happy medium in between what you do and who you do it for, your work and your life, right? But the reality of it is that just like riding a bike, there's only two options. You can either keep pedaling and moving forward and be constantly in a state of balancing, right? Or lean to one side and put your weight and your effort and your energy and your focus on that one thing, while the other one is kind of hovering there, waiting to see what's going to happen. See what I mean? So our lives operate the same way. There are things that we can be doing to try to be balancing constantly. And we're going to be talking more about that in a minute. But to envision your life being fully and completely balanced, in my opinion, is an illusion. And what that does is it keeps us hoping for something that is not the right thing to be looking for, right? So it's like trying to figure out how to lose weight while at the same time eating a lot of unhealthy foods and not moving, right? So it's not going to happen. And that ideal state of balance where everything is just equal, that is not going to happen. What we find and what we have found in our lives and in the lives of the people that we help and in talking to a lot of high achievers is that there's a little bit of unbalance the whole time. But as you work to balance one thing, the other one gets a little bit more unbalanced, and then you work to balance the other one, and then the other, right? And you're constantly in that ebb and flow and in that attempt to be balancing your life. So balance, think of it as a process, not a destination. So we are probably in this lifetime never going to be fully balanced. We're never going to probably find, and I don't like absolutes, right? There might be a person out there somewhere who really did figure out how to live a fully balanced life. But the reality of it is that for most of us humans, it's an act of constantly being balancing what we do. So that's where the idea of the compass comes in. And this is what I would love for us to think about. If you look at a compass, there's a needle, right? That points north. Yes. And as you move around, the needle swivels. And what it does is the tip of the arrow tells you where you're going. But what most people don't think about is that the other end of the arrow, the one with like the little flares, that points to what you're moving away from. I'll say that again. The tip of the arrow points to where you're going, what you're moving towards. The other side points to what you're moving away from. So in any effort that we make towards a goal, it is inevitable that as we move towards something, we're moving away from something else. And that's just the way life works, right? Unless we can multiply ourselves and clone ourselves in some way, and still the one of us that is moving in one direction is moving away from something else. So it's important to understand that our life and the effort to be balancing and to feel like no area in our life is neglected looks more like a compass than a perfectly balanced scale, right? So what happens is, if you envision the compass, right, we're going to switch the poles, and we're going to talk more about the poles in a second, but we're going to switch what the poles mean. So instead of north, south, east, and west, think about it as mind, body, spirit, and community, right? Mind, body, spirit, community. And you have one of those areas in each of the poles. So maybe you're moving more towards your body and getting in shape or whatever. Well, that means that you are, that you are probably moving away from something related to your spirit. As you move more towards community, like maybe your business, or maybe creating a nonprofit, or maybe doing something in that regard, you're moving away from your mind a little bit. So when you think about the poles, and you get to figure out which of your poles are in opposition, right? So maybe instead of using just mind, body, spirit, and community, do, family, personal time, business, and health. And as you think about your particular poles, think about which two tend to always be in opposition. And there are things that kind of overlap. There are things that are kind of hard to place in just one pole or in just one area. But think about, for the most part, what are the 4 areas of your life that are in constant battle for your time, that you're always trying to balance in some way, and place them in that compass. And then think about this notion that as you're moving towards one, you're moving away from the other. So in my case, for example, for the longest time, I felt like my business and my family were in opposition, right? So the more I worked towards my business, the more I moved away from my family. And if I switched to move towards my family, the more I moved away from my business. And that is still the case, except that now I see it a little bit differently. And that's what I want to share with you today. So there are 4 things that we can do so that as we are in this process of balancing, as we are trying to use our compass to help us find the direction that will allow us to feel like nothing is being neglected, we can be centered and be focused. We can be gentle on ourselves, not go into burnout or guilt or overwhelm, and still accomplish this sense or this idea of having our life be in a balancing state. So continuing with this idea of the compass, let's think about how a compass operates. The needle in the compass is always pointing north, right? And the fact that the needle is always pointing north is what allows you to see which direction you're moving in. If the needle moved with you, you would be totally confused. It wouldn't work. So there has to be a needle that works and that is constantly pointing north, so that as you move and the needle continues to try to find that north, you are able to see the actual direction you're moving towards, right? In our case, in this example, in this analogy, our true north is our ultimate vision and our values. So think about, what is your ultimate vision? What is it that you want your life to mean at the end of it? When you're no longer here, how do you want to be remembered? What is it that you want to leave as a legacy? And I'm not talking money, although money can be part of it. But what kind of an emotional, learning, spiritual, moral, ethical legacy do you want to leave behind? What is it that you want your life to stand for? When you think about the end of your days, what is it that if you don't work towards it, that if you don't do everything in your power to try to accomplish it, you're going to kick yourself into the next life, right? You're going to kick yourself into eternity because you know that this is something that is so deep in your heart, that is so uniquely ingrained in who you are, that if you don't do something about it, you're not being true to you and to your creator, right? So when you think about that, what is that? And it doesn't have to be, thinking about your vision and your ultimate vision doesn't have to be a daunting task. And it doesn't have to be something where you feel like you are tying yourself or shackling yourself to one particular vision. Your vision can evolve, right? But right now, this minute, as you are working to feel less torn and less pulled in a million different directions, what is that ultimate vision that is in your heart to create, right? And also, what are those values, those non-negotiables, the things that you use as a measuring stick for whether something is good or bad, right or wrong? What are those? Like, for example, for me, my values are faith, family, honesty, integrity, and generosity, right? So when I look at those 5 things, I can use those as a gauge as to whether I do something or don't do it, as to whether I try something or not, as to whether I spend money or not, as to whatever decision I'm trying to make. I filter it through those 5 things. So what is your ultimate vision? My ultimate vision is to help end discord and disconnect, and also to create an educational system that makes sense, to bring up people who are whole and who are able to use their talents and abilities to help the world, right? So that's my ultimate vision. And these are my values. So whenever I am in a space where I feel out of balance, I look at the things that I'm doing and I compare them to my true north, my vision and my values. If there's anything in my to-do list, in my goals, in my, in my tasks, in whatever it is that I'm looking at, that does not help me move closer to that vision, and that does not align to my values, guess what? It's going to be gone. It's out. It's no longer an option. And it feels so good to be able to look at these 2 things and use them as filters for whatever it is that you're doing, and to make firm decisions based on that without any kind of guilt, because you know that ultimately what you're doing is working towards what you were designed to do. So once you have defined your true north, once you know what it is, and again, these things can evolve with time, but you need to know what they are right now so that you can use them as guides and as filters, and to help you see and understand whether you're moving in the right direction or away from it, right? So once you do that, then the next thing is to understand your four poles, right? Like I said before, the general four poles are spirit, mind, body, and community. Why? Because those are the four planes in which human beings operate, right? We are three things in one. We are mind, we are body, we are spirit. Regardless of whether you believe in religion or not, you know that there's something inside of you that can only be explained through something like spirit, right? Sorry. And then we live in community. We were designed to live with other people. We weren't designed to be in a cave by ourselves, although there are some people who do, right? But those are the four realms that constitute who a human being is and what a human being is composed of and should be focused on in their lives. So once you know that those are the general ones, you can be a little bit more specific and you can get down to the granular part of what it is that you struggled with, right? Like for me, for example, my community was my family, right? So when I looked at my poles under community, I focused on my family, right? And opposite to that in mind, for me, was my business and building my business. Right now, spirit and body for me have always been spirit and body. Like I've always struggled with maintaining my health in terms of my body weight and my body image. And then my spiritual, journey of using that same time that I would use to work out or to think about my body, to use it to connect more with God and to be in the word and to be in prayer and all these wonderful things, right? So I have my four poles. But you get to figure out what your four poles are right now. And again, that can shift and change as your priorities and as your life and as your north just shifts and evolves with you. So once you know what your four poles are, then identify which are in opposition to which, because even though they can, like I said before, kind of intertwine and kind of melt in some ways or whatever, the reason you feel like you're out of balance is because there are some of your poles that are in opposition to each other in one way or another. So figure out what those are and place them in opposition to each other and understand that when you're moving towards one, you're inevitably moving away from the other, right? So now that you have your north and you know what your four poles are, you can start identifying with your needle, right, where your north is, but which direction you're actually moving towards and away from. And that leads us to the third thing, which is setting your priorities in each area that you're working to be balancing, right? So my priority with my family was spending more time with my daughters and making sure that I didn't neglect my husband, right? Those are my priorities in my family. My priorities in my business were building a list of leads, right? So building my leads and also making effective offers, right? Just to name two in each area. So I knew that the time I spent working on leads, I wasn't spending on my family. And the time I spent on my family, I wasn't working on offers, right? Just to give you a quick example. So once I set my priorities and I knew for each of my four poles what my priorities were, then the next and most important step was for me to schedule in my planner, in my calendar, whatever you use to manage your time or to work with your time, plan actual things that move you in the direction of each of the priorities and make sure that that time is about as equal as you can make it in proportion to what your ultimate vision and goal is, right? So let me clarify that a little bit. My ultimate vision and goal has to do with helping people communicate in a way that ends discord and disconnect, right? That I can apply to my family. I want my family to be connected. I don't want my family to be in discord, right? But mostly it's going to come through my business. So I know that at least for this period in my life, while that is one of the main parts of my vision, there is going to be a slightly disproportionate amount of time that I'm going to spend on building this part than in solidifying this part. And that doesn't mean I'm going to neglect my family. It just means that in terms of hours per day or hours per week or hours per month, there's going to be a slightly higher number on the business side than on the family side. And we all have areas that are going to pull us more than others, depending on where we're at, right? There was a time a little bit ago when my full focus was on my family for other reasons. actually a few years ago. So the business side was getting what was left over, right? And it's fine to have those periods of complete imbalance or something is disproportionate to the other because you're working towards a goal, so long as the other part is not completely neglected and the people involved in it understand why the shift for the time being, right? So during that time when my focus was on my family, I kept communication with my prospects through email. And I explained to them that the connection was going to be slower, that there weren't going to be weekly newsletters, that there were going to be things that weren't going to be happening, right? In that same way, now that I shifted to focusing more on my business, my family knows what I'm working on and what I'm doing and why, right? But the idea here is to place priorities on the main things, the main goal for each area, for each pole, right? For each area of your life, and to schedule at least a month in advance where and when you're going to be focusing on each of those priorities and each of those areas of your life. What I do is I color code them. So each of my daughters has a color, my husband has a color, my business has a color, my church has a color. All the important priorities in my life have their own color. And I sit with a desk calendar and I plan out when the time for each thing is going to be. And when I look at my calendar, I want to see all the colors represented, but I also want to make sure that the one that's under the most corresponds to what my top priority is in terms of my vision, and that everything else gets proportionately placed on the calendar depending on the priority, right? Like for me, I would get most business, then I would get equal amounts of each daughter and husband, then I would get church. That's the priority for me right now. That's the order right now. Doesn't mean I neglect church, doesn't mean I neglect kids. It just means that I know that in order for me to advance to my visions and keep true to my values, this is the way it gets to be right now. And that doesn't mean that next month is going to be the same. But each month, think about where your priorities are. Make sure you have at least one priority for each of your poles, and then schedule time for each of your priorities in there, so that you know that even if for a minute or two, a day or two, a week or two, it feels like you're moving just in one direction and focusing there and chugging along in that direction, and you know that there's things behind you that you're kind of not looking at right now, you know that soon the focus is going to shift. And you're going to be able to look at that other area and really put your whole intention and focus on that. And the key here is whatever time you're spending in each of the poles, be fully present in that pole. Don't allow yourself to drift into guilt for neglecting the other area for the time being, right? Which leads me to the last and probably the most important thing is show yourself grace. There will be times that feel totally unbalanced in one area or the other. There are going to be moments in which you stop yourself and you go, wait a minute, I haven't spent time with X, Y, or Z for a little bit. Let me just go back and check my calendar and make sure that it's coming. And there are going to be moments when you're like, am I doing this right? Am I neglecting or ignoring something that is really important for the sake of this other thing? And that's part of being human. That's part of the process. But that's why we schedule it. That's why we have it in a place where we can see it. So that when those moments come, we can bring ourselves back to, wait, I'm balancing. I'm balancing. And the moment to shift in this direction is coming. I just need to stay focused here on this area for a little bit longer. Does that make sense? Now, I really hope that this has been absolutely helpful. And if it has, then I invite you to head on over to marciamorrow.com and schedule a clarity and activation call. In that call, we're going to talk about what your poles can be, how you get to be in a state of balancing so that you feel like you're moving forward and gaining momentum without tipping over to one side or the other. And we will leave that 30-minute call with a plan for you to go forward boldly, creating the integrated life that you were designed and created to have. So again, head on over to marciamorrow.com and schedule your clarity and activation call so that we can talk through all of these things and we can help you leave that call with clarity, with confidence, and knowing that you are moving forward in the direction of your dreams and that you are living the life that you were designed to live. Again, so as we move forward and as we wrap this up, let me encourage you and remind you Balance is not the goal. The goal is to be balancing towards the achievement of your vision and in living and in keeping with your values. And the way we do this is by identifying our true north, which is again our vision and our values. Then we're going to define and understand what our 4 poles are, right? What our 4 areas of connection and priorities and focus are. Then we're going to set clear priorities for each of those areas, and we're going to calendar them. We're going to schedule them so that we know that even if we're focusing on one thing right now, focus is going to shift soon, and we're going to be able to rebalance and stay in that forward motion regardless of what we might feel right now. And just extend yourself some grace and know that you're doing amazing and that your dream is there for a reason. You have been called to create something amazing, and you don't get to leave this earth with that unaccomplished or unfinished. I'm here to support. I'm here to help. Thank you for spending this time with me. I don't take it lightly. Share it with anybody in your life that you think might find this helpful. And I will see you next week here on Sincerely Speaking. Thanks.